You wake, as you always wake, already being watched. A groom of the chamber stands near the door, has stood there most of the night, close enough to hear if you so much as turn over badly in your sleep. You have not been alone in a room, truly alone, since you were a child, and by now the absence of privacy feels less like a deprivation than like weather. Something you stopped noticing was even there, except on mornings like this one, when for no clear reason you notice it again. Dressing takes longer than it should, robes and chains settled onto you by hands that are not your own, each layer a small, deliberate reminder of what you are today, which is not entirely the same thing as who you are. You remember, while a servant fastens a clasp at your shoulder, the day all of this became permanent rather than simply promised, kneeling in a cold stone church as oil was pressed to your forehead, palms, and chest, a bishop's voice carrying words you'd rehearsed hearing your whole life without ever quite believing they'd be spoken over you. Something changed in that church that no one has ever fully explained to you, only assured you was real. You've been living inside that assurance ever since. By the time your dressing is finished this morning, you are visibly, unmistakably a king again, and the man underneath that has to wait until tonight, if tonight even allows it. The morning council brings the kind of news mornings like this usually bring: unrest in a border shire, a lord slow to answer his summons, rumors of ships gathering somewhere across the water that may mean nothing or may mean war by autumn.
You listen, ask the questions a king is expected to ask, give the orders a king is expected to give, and try not to let your face show how much of this feels like guesswork dressed up as authority. Every decision this morning will be someone else's problem within the hour, and your own problem for the rest of your life. By the time the council empties, word has already reached you that the hall is filling for the other business of the day, the business that has nothing to do with borders or lords or ships. You've done this enough times now that your body starts preparing for it before your mind fully catches up, a kind of bracing you've never quite gotten used to, no matter how many times you've stood at that threshold. The hall holds more people than usual this morning, word of your presence in this town having traveled ahead of you the way it always does. Rows of the sick and their families, some who have walked for days to be here, waiting for something modern medicine in this century has almost nothing to offer them. A growth at the neck, swollen and disfiguring, the affliction people call the king's evil, believed by nearly everyone in this hall, including some part of you that still isn't entirely sure what it believes, to be curable by exactly one thing in the world: your hands. It is not humility that makes this hard. It is the opposite. Every person in this hall is here because your coronation was understood, by them and by the church and by the law itself, as something closer to ordination than to mere appointment. Oil pressed to your skin the same way it's pressed to a priest's, a transfer of grace nobody expects you to fully explain, only to carry. You did not ask to be able to heal people.
You were simply told, the day you were crowned, that you now could. A chaplain begins the prayers before the first person is brought forward. Familiar Latin you could recite in your sleep by now. And then it starts, the way it always starts. A name, a face, a swollen throat presented for your hands the way an offering is presented at an altar. You press your fingers to the skin, make the sign of the cross, and a gold coin, pierced and strung on a ribbon, is placed in trembling hands as a token of what has, in theory, just occurred. The first is an old soldier, someone's father, someone's grandfather, who thanks you in a voice too rough for the words to come out steady. The second is a boy no older than 8, held forward by a mother whose entire face is a single unbearable question. And when you touch the boy's neck, gently, deliberately, you watch her exhale like she's been holding that breath since the day the sickness first appeared. You cannot promise her anything. You touch him anyway, because not touching him is not a choice available to you today. A woman further down the line, old enough to be someone's grandmother twice over, tells the chaplain, unprompted, that she walked the better part of 9 days to reach this hall, sleeping in the open more nights than not, because word had reached her village that you would be passing through this town this season and might never pass through it again in her lifetime. You do not know what to say to that kind of arithmetic, a life measured out in days walked against a single moment of touch, so you say nothing at all, and simply do the only thing you actually can do, which is exactly what she walked 9 days for. The line does not end.
It simply continues, face after face, name after name, hour bleeding into hour, your knees aching from the kneeling this ceremony sometimes requires, your voice thinning from the repeated blessing, your hands by midday faintly stained from coins that have passed through hundreds of desperate palms before reaching yours. You keep your expressions steady through all of it, because a king visibly exhausted by the act of healing is a king who has planted a small, dangerous doubt in a room full of people who need badly to believe the opposite. Somewhere past the midpoint of the line, one of your guards shifts closer to you than usual, close enough that you notice before you understand why. His eyes are on a man near the back of the hall, someone who has been watching you rather than waiting his turn, hands kept low, posture wrong in a way you've learned to feel before you can fully articulate it. Kings in this century do not simply die in their beds. You know this the way you know your own name, and for one long, cold moment, the entire ceremony narrows down to that single, unmoving figure at the back of the hall. You do not stop touching the next person in line. This, you understand with total clarity, precisely the moment a king cannot afford to flinch, not because courage comes easily to you right now, but because 500 watching people will remember exactly how you behaved in this instant for the rest of their lives, and what they remember will matter more than what actually happens. Your hands stay steady on a stranger's throat while your guards move, unhurried on the surface, toward the man at the back of the hall. Every second it takes them to cross that distance feels considerably longer than any of the hours that came before it.
It resolves the way most of these moments resolve, which is to say quietly, almost disappointingly. A merchant's servant, agitated over a private grievance that has nothing to do with you at all, disarmed of nothing more dangerous than an urgent temper, and escorted out still shouting about an unpaid debt. Your pulse takes considerably longer to believe this than your face does. You finish the line anyway, coin after coin, hand after hand, because stopping now would tell this hall something you have no intention of letting it learn. The last person is touched well into the afternoon, and when it's finally over, you sit for a moment somewhere no one expects you to be composed, hands aching in a way no one who hasn't done this would understand, some deep, undefinable tiredness sitting in your chest that has nothing to do with your knees or your throat. You have just spent hours being treated as something between a man and a miracle, and you are, at the end of it, still entirely uncertain which one actually walked out of that hall. The evening council resumes as though the day's other business never paused for any of this, because in the eyes of the crown, it hasn't. The Shire is still unsettled. The ships are still gathering, or not, no one is yet certain which. You give more orders, hear more reports, and somewhere underneath the steady voice you've maintained since dawn, a version of you that got frightened in that hall today is still quietly, privately shaking.
Alone, finally, in the narrow window of night nobody else is permitted to witness, you allow yourself the thought you cannot allow in daylight, that you do not know, with any real certainty, whether the hands that touched hundreds of strangers today actually carry what everyone in that hall believes they carry. You were told this power was yours the day oil touched your forehead. You have never once been told what to do with the doubt that came free with it. Sleep, when it finally comes, is thinner than it should be for a body this tired, because even now, in the dark, the groom by the door is still awake, still watching, still exactly as present as he was this morning. You are never, on any night of this life, entirely alone with your own uncertainty. That, more than the crown, more than the coins, more than the line of desperate faces, might be the truest weight of what you carry. For nearly 700 years after ceremonies like this one, kings and queens in England and France would go on touching the sick for the king's evil, the practice surviving wars, dynasties, even a revolution or two, continuing long past the medieval world that first gave it meaning, before finally fading out in the 18th century as new ways of understanding disease and new ways of understanding monarchy itself made the old certainty harder and harder to sustain. In 1924, a French historian named Marc Bloch, working in the years after a war that had shattered most people's remaining faith in old certainties of any kind, sat down to study this exact ritual across its full 7-century span, in France and in England both.
His book, translated into English as The Royal Touch, treated the ceremony not as a superstition to be mocked from a comfortable historical distance, but as a serious, careful case study in something he found far more interesting: how a belief, sincerely held by millions of ordinary people across centuries, could become one of the most powerful tools a government ever had, entirely without a single soldier or law being involved. Bloch spent years working through royal account books, chapel records, and eyewitness chronicles, tracing exactly how many people a single monarch might touch in one ceremony, sometimes hundreds in a single sitting, and how the ritual quietly shifted in meaning across centuries, even as its outward form stayed remarkably the same. He was, in his own way, doing to this ceremony precisely what a good king was never permitted to do inside it, asking, openly and carefully, whether any of it was actually true, and discovering that the question mattered far less than what millions of people for 700 years chose to believe anyway. His work helped found an entirely new way of studying history itself, one more interested in what people actually believed and felt than in which king won which battle, and it began with this exact scene: hands, strangers, coins, and hundreds of desperate people who traveled real distances on real roads because they genuinely believed, with their whole hearts, that a king's touch could do what nothing else available to them could. Whether or not it ever actually healed anyone, it did something historians still study closely today. For 700 years, it made an entire idea of kingship feel to the people kneeling in that hall completely, undeniably real.